Hey everyone, welcome back. You wanted to know more about what's going on with U.S. government spending, especially with all this talk about President Trump's cost-cutting plans at the Pentagon. We've got some pretty in-depth articles here. And, well, let me tell you, it's a pretty complicated story.
Oh, yeah, it definitely is. I think one of the things that jumps out right away is the sheer size of these proposed cuts. Trump has said he wants to cut billions, even hundreds of billions, from the Pentagon budget, which is already a massive $800 billion a year.
Wow. Yeah, that's a lot of money. Makes you wonder what exactly he's planning to cut and what the impact will be.
Right. And Trump has been really emphasizing this idea that there's a lot of waste and fraud hidden within the Pentagon's budget.
Yeah.
Kind of like what he did when he was trying to reduce spending in other government agencies.
So basically he's saying there's a bunch of wasted money and he's going to find it and get rid of it. But how's he going to do that? It seems like a pretty tough job.
Well, that's where things get interesting. Trump has appointed Elon Musk, that Elon Musk, to lead this whole thing.
Wait, Elon Musk, the CEO of Tesla and SpaceX, what does he know about government spending?
Yeah, that's what a lot of people are asking. Trump has created this new thing called the Department of Government Efficiency, and he's put Musk in charge of it.
Okay, so we've got Trump who wants to make these huge cuts to the Pentagon budget, and he's brought in Elon Musk to lead the effort. What could go wrong, right?
Well, for one thing, there are concerns about potential conflicts of interest. Musk's companies, SpaceX and Starlink, they already have big government contracts, especially with the Pentagon. So some people are wondering if Musk can really be impartial when it comes to figuring out where to make cuts.
Yeah, I see what you mean. It's kind of like putting the fox in charge at the hen house.
Exactly. But National Security Advisor Mike Waltz has said that's not a problem. He says they'll have these appropriate firewalls in place to prevent any bias.
Firewalls. What does that even mean in this situation?
Basically, it means measures to stop Musk from using his position to benefit his own companies. Like maybe he wouldn't be involved in any decisions about contracts with SpaceX or Starlink, and there would be a lot of oversight to make sure everything is transparent.
Okay, that makes sense. But even with those safeguards, I bet there are still a lot of people who are uneasy about this whole thing.
Oh, definitely. And to make things even more complicated, there was a recent development. A federal judge has temporarily blocked Musk's team from getting access to Treasury Department payment data.
Whoa. That's a pretty big obstacle. What was the judge's reasoning for that?
Well, the judge was worried about sensitive personal information being disclosed and the possibility of irreparable harm to Americans if this data got into the wrong hands. So basically, the judge put everything on hold until these concerns could be addressed.
So we've got a federal judge stepping in and putting on the brakes. How has all of this played out politically?
It's become quite a political football, as you might expect. The Democrats have been especially critical of Trump's approach. Senator Chris Murphy even called it the most serious constitutional crisis the country has faced, certainly since Watergate.
Wow. That's a pretty serious accusation. What are the Democrats so worried about?
Well, they're saying that Trump is exceeding his authority by trying to go around Congress, which is usually responsible for controlling government spending. They think he's trying to grab control of the money and decide how it's spent without any real oversight or accountability. And they say that undermines the separation of powers and threatens democracy.
So it's not just about the cuts themselves, it's about the way Trump is going about making them.
Exactly. It's raising some fundamental questions about the balance of power in the government and whether one branch can have too much control over spending.
This is getting pretty messy. What about the Republicans? Where do they stand on this?
It's interesting. Even with all these concerns, a lot of Republicans in Congress are supporting Trump and Musk's efforts. For example, Representative Mike Turner has said that the way the U.S. is spending money isn't sustainable, and that we need to really look at our spending policies.
So they agree that there's a problem, but do they agree with the solution?
Well, it's kind of complicated. Turner supports the idea of cutting spending, but he's also said that Musk needs to be more careful about how he talks about it publicly. Like maybe he's causing too much controversy and making people nervous.
So it sounds like they're trying to be careful. They want to support the idea of being responsible with money, but they also don't want to be associated with some of the more controversial stuff that Trump and Musk are doing.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Okay, so we have Trump and Musk trying to shake things up, but they're getting pushback from a federal judge and a lot of criticism from Democrats. And the Republicans are trying to figure out how to handle this tricky situation. So what does this mean for the actual agencies that are facing these cuts?
That's a really important question, and that's what we need to look at next. The potential impact of these cuts is pretty big, and we need to understand the consequences.
Okay, let's dive into that. what are some of the specific agencies that are affected? And what are the possible implications?
Well, one example is USAI, which handles foreign aid. And then there's the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. They're already facing significant budget reductions and limits on what they can do. And then there's the Department of Education. Remember how Trump has been saying he wants to get rid of it completely? That's still a possibility.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are worried about that.
This is starting to sound pretty serious. What does it really mean for these agencies to be severely impacted? Can you give us some specific examples of how these cuts would actually affect their ability to do their jobs?
Sure. Let's start with USAID. They're responsible for providing humanitarian assistance and development aid all over the world. So with big cuts, they might have to reduce or even completely eliminate programs that provide food aid to countries that are experiencing famines, or programs that support economic development in struggling nations. And that could be devastating for millions of people who rely on that assistance.
That's a really sobering thought. What about the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau? What are the potential consequences of cutting their budget?
Well, the CFPB was created after the 2008 financial crisis. It was designed to protect consumers from predatory lending and other kinds of financial abuse. So with less money, they might have to cut back on their enforcement activities. And that could leave consumers more vulnerable to scams and unfair practices by financial institutions.
So basically, these cuts could end up hurting everyday Americans who need the CFPB to protect them.
Exactly. And then, of course, there's the Department of Education, which Trump has said he wants to eliminate completely. If that happened, it would have a massive impact on the entire U.S. education system, from funding for schools to student loan programs.
That would be a huge change. What are the arguments for and against doing something that drastic?
Well, the people who want to get rid of the Department of Education say that it's basically a big bloated bureaucracy and that it interferes with local control of schools. They think that education should be handled at the state and local levels and that the federal government shouldn't be involved.
And what about the people who are against getting rid of it? What are their concerns?
They say that the Department of Education is really important for making sure that education is fair and high quality all across the country. They point to programs like Title I, which gives money to schools in low-income areas, and special education programs that help students with disabilities. They're worried that without the Department of Education, those programs could be cut or eliminated, and that would hurt the most vulnerable students.
So this isn't just about money. It's really about what role the federal government should play in education.
You got it. It's a really deep ideological debate. It reflects different ideas about what the government's role in society should be.
This is a really complex issue with no easy answers. So we've got these potential cuts hanging over these agencies, and there's a lot of uncertainty about what's going to happen. But let's shift gears a bit and talk about Elon Musk. He's a pretty fascinating guy, to say the least. What makes him qualified to lead this government efficiency initiative?
Well, Musk is known for being really innovative and shaking things up. He's built these incredibly successful companies like Tesla and SpaceX, and he did it by challenging the way things are usually done and finding new ways to do them.
So the idea is that he can bring that same kind of thinking to the government.
Exactly. Trump thinks that Musk can spot inefficiencies and waste that people who've been working in the government for a long time might not even see.
But is being a successful entrepreneur enough to qualify someone to overhaul government spending? It seems like those are two very different things.
That's a good point. The government is notoriously slow and complicated. It's not clear if Musk's experience in the business world will translate to that environment.
It's definitely a gamble, and like we said, it's already causing a lot of controversy. What are some of the other criticisms of Musk being involved in this?
Besides the potential conflicts of interest, some people are saying that Musk's focus on efficiency might actually hurt effectiveness. They're saying that just cutting costs without thinking about the consequences could undermine the ability of those agencies to do what they're supposed to do.
So it's not just about spending less, it's about spending it wisely and making sure that those cuts don't end up causing more problems.
Exactly. It's about finding the right balance between being responsible with money and making sure that essential government services are funded.
It sounds like a very difficult balance to achieve, especially in a political climate where there's so much pressure to cut spending and shrink the government.
It is. And that's why it's so important to be having these conversations and to really look at what could happen as a result of these decisions. We have to look beyond the politics and the personalities and ask the tough questions.
Like, how will these cuts actually affect people's lives? Will they make things better or worse?
Exactly. We need to look at the data and the evidence. What does the research say about how well these programs work? What are the possible downsides of cutting their funding? We need to have these honest discussions,
Yeah.
even if they're hard.
It's about understanding the complexities and not falling for easy answers or getting stuck in ideological debates.
Exactly. It's about understanding the government is complex and that it's difficult to find the right balance between all these competing priorities.
It's a lot to ask, but it's something that we as citizens need to be involved in.
Yeah,
And we need to hold our leaders accountable.
absolutely. We can't just let them make these decisions without our input. We need to be informed, engaged, and make our voices heard.
This has been a really insightful conversation. You've given us a lot to think about when it comes to government spending, efficiency, effectiveness, and the future of government. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up?
Well, just remember that this is a story that's still unfolding. The decisions being made today are going to have an impact for years to come. So it's important to stay informed and keep asking questions and to hold our leaders accountable.
That's a great point to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into government spending. We'll be back next time with another interesting topic. Until then, keep asking questions, keep learning, and stay engaged.
So USAC, they're responsible for providing humanitarian assistance and development aid all over the world. With these big cuts, they might have to scale back or even get rid of programs that provide food aid to countries where people are starving, or programs that help with economic development in struggling nations. And that could be devastating for millions of people who really depend on that assistance.
That's a tough thing to think about. What about the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau? What happens if their budget gets cut?
Well, the CFPB, it was created after the 2008 financial crisis. It was supposed to protect consumers from things like predatory lending and other financial abuses. With less money, they might have to reduce their enforcement activities. And that could leave consumers more vulnerable to scams and unfair practices by banks and other financial institutions.
So these cuts could actually end up hurting ordinary Americans who depend on the CFPB for protection.
Exactly. And then there's the Department of Education. Remember, Trump has talked about getting rid of it completely. If that happens, it would have a massive impact on the entire education system here in the U.S. Everything from funding for schools to student loans would be affected.
That would be a radical change. What are the arguments for and against such a drastic move?
Well, the people who support getting rid of the Department of Education, they argue that it's a big, bloated bureaucracy that's just getting in the way of local control of schools. They think that education should be handled by the states and local communities, and that the federal government should stay out of it.
What about the arguments against eliminating the Department of Education? What are the potential downsides?
People who oppose getting rid of the Department of Education argue that it plays a vital role in making sure that education is fair and high quality across the country. They point to programs like Title I, which provides funding to schools in low-income areas, and special education programs that support students with disabilities. They're worried that without the Department of Education, these programs could be cut or even eliminated, and that would leave vulnerable students behind.
So this debate is about a lot more than just dollars and cents. It's really about the role of the federal government in education and whether a centralized approach is better or worse. It's a really complex issue with no easy answers. So we've got all these potential cuts looming over these agencies and a lot of uncertainty about what will happen. But let's talk a little bit more about Elon Musk. He's a fascinating figure. What makes him qualified to lead this government efficiency initiative?
Well, Musk is really known for his innovative thinking and his ability to disrupt industries. He's built successful companies like Tesla and SpaceX by challenging the way things have always been done and finding new ways to do them.
So the thinking is that he can bring that kind of outside-the-box approach to the government.
That's the idea. Trump seems to believe that Musk can find waste and inefficiency that career government officials might miss.
But is being a successful entrepreneur really enough to qualify someone to completely overhaul government spending? It seems like those are very different skills.
Yeah, that's a valid point. Government bureaucracy is very complex and resistant to change. It's not clear if Musk's experience in the business world will be helpful in this environment.
It's a big gamble. And as we've already discussed, it's creating a lot of controversy. What are some of the other criticisms that have been leveled against Musk's involvement in this?
Well, apart from the potential conflicts of interest, some critics are concerned that Musk's focus on efficiency might come at the expense of effectiveness. They're arguing that just cutting costs without thinking about the consequences could damage the ability of those agencies to actually do their jobs.
So it's not just about spending less money, it's about spending it wisely. and making sure that those cuts don't backfire and cause more problems.
Exactly. It's a balancing act between fiscal responsibility and making sure essential government services are properly funded.
It sounds like a very tough balancing act, especially in a political climate where there's so much pressure to reduce spending and shrink the government.
It is. And that's why it's so important to have these kinds of conversations and to really think about the potential consequences of these decisions. We need to look beyond the rhetoric and the political gamesmanship and ask those tough questions.
Like, how will these cuts really affect people's lives? Will they make things better or will they make things worse?
Exactly. We need to use data and evidence. What does the research tell us about how well these programs actually work? What are the possible downsides of cutting their funding? We need to have these honest conversations, even if they're difficult.
It's about really understanding the issues and not settling for simple solutions or getting caught up in ideological battles.
Exactly. It's about understanding that government is complicated and that it's a challenge to find the right balance between all these different priorities.
It's a lot to ask, but it's something that we as citizens need to be involved in and hold our leaders accountable.
Absolutely. We can't just sit back and let them make these decisions without our input. We have to be informed, engaged, and make our voices heard.
This has been a really insightful conversation. You've given us so much to think about when it comes to government spending, efficiency, effectiveness, and the role of government. Is there anything else you'd like to share before we move on?
I think it's important to remember that this is a story that's still developing. The decisions that are being made today will have a lasting impact. So it's important to stay informed, keep asking questions, and hold our leaders accountable.
It's a great point. It's easy to get caught up in the day-to-day news cycle, but we need to remember that these issues have long-term consequences.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've talked about the potential impact of these cuts on agencies like USAID, the CFPB, and the Department of Education. We've also discussed the controversy surrounding Elon Musk's involvement in this efficiency drive, and we've touched on the broader implications for the role of government in society. What do you think are the key things our listeners should be paying attention to as this story continues to unfold?
I think it's crucial to look beyond the headlines and consider the possible consequences of this shift in government spending, both the good and the bad.
So we shouldn't just focus on the political drama or the personalities involved, but rather on the substance of the issue and how it will affect people's lives.
Exactly. And that means paying attention to the details. How are these cuts actually being made? Which programs are being affected? What are the unintended consequences?
So it's about asking the tough questions and demanding transparency from our leaders.
Absolutely. And it's also about having informed discussions and debates about the role of government and how we should use our resources.
It sounds like we all have a role to play in shaping the future of government spending and making sure it reflects our values and priorities.
That's right.
This has been a really great conversation. You've given us a lot to think about regarding government spending, efficiency, effectiveness, and the future of government itself. Do you have any final thoughts or insights you'd like to leave our listeners with?
One thing to remember is that government spending isn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. It's about people. It's about the programs and services that make our lives better and support our communities.
It's about investing in our future and creating a society that works for everyone.
Exactly. And as we move forward, we need to keep that in mind. We need to make sure that our decisions are guided by compassion and a commitment to the common good.
That's a powerful message. It's about finding that balance between fiscal responsibility and social responsibility.
And recognizing that those two goals don't have to be in conflict. We can be responsible with our money while still investing in the things that really matter.
Well said. So we've explored the complexities of government spending, the challenges of achieving efficiency, and the importance of considering the human impact of these decisions. What does all of this mean for the future of government and the people it serves?
That's the big question,
Yeah.
and only time will tell. But one thing is for sure, this is an issue that will continue to shape our lives for years to come.
And it's an issue that demands our attention and our engagement.
Absolutely. We all have a stake in this, and we need to make sure our voices are heard.
We've covered a lot of ground today, but this conversation is far from over. We encourage you to continue exploring these issues and to engage in thoughtful dialogue about the role of government and the best way to allocate resources. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into government spending. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and stay engaged. It really does feel like we're in uncharted waters here, this whole situation with government spending and potential cuts. And then you bring Elon Musk into the mix. It's a lot to take in.
It really is. I think this whole thing really highlights the tension between efficiency and effectiveness in government.
What do you mean by that? What's the difference between those two? And why is it so important in this discussion?
Well, efficiency is all about doing things with the least amount of waste. Like wasting time, money, personnel. It's about streamlining processes and making sure you're getting the most output for your input. But effectiveness is about actually achieving the desired outcome, regardless of how much it costs or how long it takes.
So you could have a program that's super efficient, runs like a well-oiled machine, but it doesn't actually achieve its goals.
Exactly. And on the flip side, you could have a program that's maybe a little less efficient, a bit more clunky or bureaucratic, but ultimately gets the job done and delivers results.
Okay, I see what you mean. So in this case, the concern is that focusing too much on efficiency, like just cutting costs without thinking about anything else, could actually undermine the effectiveness of these government programs.
Precisely.
Yeah.
If you just slash funding to an agency without thinking about how it will affect their ability to provide services, you might save some money in the short term, but you could end up with much bigger problems later on.
So it's like a false economy. You think you're saving money, but in the long run, it ends up costing more.
Exactly. It's not just about cutting costs. It's about being smart and making sure that you're not sacrificing the effectiveness of programs that people rely on.
Right. It's a tough balancing act, especially when there's so much pressure to cut spending.
It is. And that's why it's so important to have these conversations and to really think about the potential consequences of these decisions. We need to move beyond the political rhetoric and the grandstanding and really ask the tough questions.
Like, what will these cuts actually mean for people? Will they make things better or worse?
Exactly. We need to be guided by data and evidence. What does the research tell us about how well these programs actually work? What are the potential downsides of cutting their funding? We need to be honest with ourselves, even if it's uncomfortable.
It's about understanding the nuances and not falling for easy answers or ideological traps.
Exactly.
It's about recognizing that government is complex and that it's hard to find the perfect balance between all these competing priorities.
Right.
It's a big challenge, but it's something that we as citizens need to be engaged in. We need to hold our leaders accountable.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
We can't just sit back and let these decisions happen without our input. We need to stay informed, stay engaged, and make our voices heard.
Well, this has been a really insightful conversation. You've given us a lot to think about. Government spending, efficiency, effectiveness, even the future of government itself. Is there anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
I think it's important to remember that this is a story that's still unfolding. The decisions being made right now will have consequences for years to come. So stay informed, keep asking those tough questions, and hold your leaders accountable.
Couldn't agree more. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into government spending. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and stay engaged.